Hi everyone, and welcome to this podcast dedicated to medium and long-term effects of fiscal policies. Before the shock, our economy is on its initial long-term equilibrium. This equilibrium is non-variation in a situation of imperfect competition. In other words, W, P, and R are flexible, but there are real rigidities that are remaining. On the goods market, the firm behaves in a situation of monopolistic competition, and on the labor market, the negotiated real wage is fixed. For the negotiated real wage gamma, labor demand is below labor supply, which means that there still is some persisting unemployment in the long term. With the production function, we deduce the equilibrium level of production y0, and then we go up in the graph to obtain the initial interest rate R0 and the initial level of prices P. Let's now look at the impact of an expansionary fiscal policy financed by borrowing, DG higher than 0. Remember that in the short term, W and P are fixed, and the production adjusts to the demand. The increase in G increases the demand, and IS shifts to the right. Because W and P are fixed, we observe an adjustment through quantities. The production adjusts to the demand, and therefore increases. Note that we assume that the firms can increase their production and have an incentive to do so. The short-term equilibrium therefore yields an output higher than in the initial long-term equilibrium. The interest rate increases as well, which triggers a crowding out effect. This short-term equilibrium hides, however, an excess demand of goods. We can see that the short-term demand YD is higher than short-term YS. For the level of production Y short-term, the firms will need to hire more people. Instead of demanding N0 of labor, they will demand more and short-term. Employment increases. Note that the firms are outside of their labor demand curve, so they no longer maximize their profit. Indeed, confronted to the increase in demand, the firms in a situation of monopolistic competition would have preferred to increase prices, which they cannot because we are in the short term. Despite the increase in N, there remains some unemployment. Moving into the medium term, the signals of this equilibrium observed in the short term will progressively push prices up. When prices become flexible, while nominal wages remain fixed, firms will respond to the excess demand of goods by increasing prices in order to maximize their profits. So prices increase, which will have two impacts. The supply of goods increases because the real wage W over P decreases. Remember that W is fixed. And the demand of goods decreases through the channel of the interest rate. Indeed, when P increases, real balances decrease, which means that the money supply decreases. We have an excess demand on the money market, which triggers an increase in the interest rate. This results in lower investment and hence lower demand. Graphically, the increase in P shifts LM to the left. The medium-term equilibrium displays a lower output than in the short term and a higher interest rate. We can see the price crowding out effect initiated by the increase in prices, which led to an increase in the interest rates. Overall, the increase in P enables to reach an equilibrium. To the output value of this equilibrium Y medium term corresponds a level N medium term of employment, which is lower than the short-term value, but higher than N0. We observe that despite the decrease in real wage, employment decreases in the economy compared to the short term. This is the apparent paradox of the medium term, which is due to the fact that in the medium term, firms reintegrate their labor demand curve to maximize their profit, which they couldn't do in the short term. When maximizing their profit, employment decreases. In the end, in the medium term, the goods market has reached an equilibrium, but there still is some unemployment on the labor market, both because of the rigidity of the nominal wage and because of the real rigidities associated to imperfect competition. In the long term, the nominal wage becomes flexible. There are no more nominal rigidities. W, P, and R are flexible, but there still are some real rigidities as we are in imperfect competition. Because prices increased in the medium term, the real wage became lower than its negotiated value, gamma. Wage negotiations will therefore impose an increase in the nominal wage to bring back the real wage to the long-term negotiated level. This increase will trigger an upward wage price spiral. Indeed, the increase in W will increase the real wage, which will decrease the supply of goods, generating an excess demand on the goods market. This excess will be resolved through an increase in prices, which will decrease, once again, the real wage. The nominal wage must increase again to reach gamma, which induces a new increase in prices, etc., etc. All in all, we have an upward wage price spiral, which ends when the real wage is back to gamma. Once at gamma, we are actually back to the long-term equilibrium on the labor market, and the level of employment in the economy corresponds to the level that was corresponding to the negotiated real wage. Using the technical constraints, we are back to the initial level of production Y0. The LM curve shifts again to the left with the increase in prices, and we observe here a new crowding out effect, which we call wage crowding out, because it is the increase in nominal wages which is at the origin of the increase in P and the increase in the interest rates. With IS, we can then calculate the long-term interest rate, and with LM, we obtain the level of prices P. And finally, we easily deduce the equilibrium level of nominal wages through gamma. Of course, as we said earlier, there still is some persisting unemployment in the long term because we are in imperfect competition. We can represent the effect of the shock in the plane YP. In the short term, the shock shifts the quasi-demand to the right, which leads to an excess demand of goods at fixed prices. we can see that YS short term is lower than YD short term. We also see that the firm does not maximize its profit because the short-term equilibrium is located outside of the supply curve. The increase in prices in the medium term will have two effects. The demand of goods will decrease and the supply of goods will increase. Once again, remember that for the demand, the causal relationship is indirect because it goes through the channel of the interest rate. The increase in P decreases the supply of money, which leads to an increase in the interest rate, resulting in lower demand. In the medium term, we reach an equilibrium with higher prices. In the long term, because the real wage became lower than the negotiated real wage, the nominal wage increases, which pivots the curve YS to the left. The upward wage price spiral brings us to the long-term equilibrium with higher prices and lower output than at medium term. The economy has come back to its initial level of output before the shock, but with higher prices.